We're live. We're up. Alan Wick. Oh, what a pleasure it is to have you on this show. I'm going to introduce you in a way that isn't going to say, this is Alan Wick and this is what he does. I'm going to introduce you by way of how I felt coming on your radio show so that people get a sense of who you are in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a standard in my book called No Compare because it doesn't help, right? And I know this, and wherever I can practice this, and I notice when I am comparing and give it up. And the most recent example of where I compared and went into a whole, was coming on your radio show. And I went on your website and, I read up on who you were and I listened to some of your stuff. And I went, I can't go on this guy's radio show. I'm not big enough to do this. And so that's who you are for me. I was like in awe of what you do, the businesses you scale, the fact that you have a radio show. And I was literally going, and I gave it up, right? And I came on anyway, and it was great, and we had fun. And then I went, whilst in he's never going to come on my show. And I went, will you come on my show? And here you are.
Absolutely.
So that's who you are for me. So people get a sense of like, what you do. And we're going to spend the next couple of hours hanging out, talking about business, talking about what it takes, how you work, your way of doing business. I think the other thing for me to say, which was actually brought up on the leaders group that we're on, when they said, I love the introverted entrepreneur. That's a hell of a mouthful. And I think it's really key to get that in early. I'm a very probably extroverted, loud entrepreneur. So it comes naturally. And what I love is when, you said that to me on the radio show. I was like, wow, I didn't realize that about you until you shared it. And I think it's important to share that first. So if there's anyone listening to this going, people that know me know I'm loud and noisy. And yes, it takes something for me to get on these things, but it's natural. Whereas for introverted people, that really takes something. So I'd like to go there. I want to know more background about the businesses you've worked with and the history. So let's start with a sort of whistle-stop tour of, who are you? Where did you grow up? What are you passionate about? So people get to hear from you about all of that.
Gosh, okay, that's a lot. How long have we got? We've got plenty of time, haven't we?
A couple of hours, so we're all good. So you can let's just see where it goes. But like, who is Alan Wick? Where have you come from? What gets you to do what you do?
Well, I think that the natural place to start, which I wouldn't normally mention, but I think given what's going on in the world at the moment, is that my family is originally from Ukraine. My original name was Zwick with a Z, Zwick, and was anglicized by my grandfather when he came over between the wars. And it's just west of Lviv, which is on the western end of Ukraine. And, I wouldn't be here unless my grandfather had got away. And my maternal grandparents also from a similar area. And so actually, I know I sound English, and I've been brought up in a public school and all that stuff, and got given a very good education, had a proper sounding accent, sound very English. But actually, I feel quite a bit of sympathy, obviously, with what's going on in Ukraine. And it has brought back what happened to my grandparents and great-grandparents, and that kind of culture coming over as immigrants. I think that also had a very big effect on my family and me as a child, because there was this thing about immigrants proving themselves, wanting to show wherever they landed, whether it was America or here, Israel, Australia, whatever. It was almost always English speaking if it wasn't Israel. That they were worthy. And I hear that a lot from refugees coming over now, Alex, that they've got to show that they're not just down and out and relying on the state of wherever they're going. So there was this incredible drive from my family. I picked that up from a very early age, I think.
Amazing. And so how well did you know your grandparents? Were you old enough to get to know them, or did they pass away before you were old enough to kind of have conversations with them? Like, I'm lucky that my grandmother's still alive. She's 99. So I've spent, considerable amount of time with her. But how did all that work out? So where did you come to in the UK? What did they come to?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. The funny thing is, in some ways, I know more about my paternal grandfather and grandparents, even though he died when I was very young, when I was a baby. So I don't really remember meeting him. But there's so much in the family folklore and family history about him. I met my maternal grandfather and remember him up until I would say I was in my teens. But actually, he was a very reserved person. And although we would go there for most Friday nights to have Friday night dinner, I can't remember a lot about him. I remember what he did, but as far as closeness or personality, not really. And he also, like my paternal grandfather, was in business, and that's what I was born into, being in business, both grandparents. And so my aunts, uncles, parents, etc., all in business. And that's what I really absorbed growing up, hearing all about what was going on week in, week out, and both the upsides and the downsides. So I know that about them both, but not so much about personalities.
And when did you first get into business yourself? So what was where did you do with school and education, and what did you do there?
Yeah, it was from a very early age. I remember I think I made money on the tuck shop from about 11 or 12, and having things that were instantly available that were about to run out. And that was a really good thing. So that taught me that scarcity model from the age of 11 or 12, I think. And then in my later teens, I was in a band trying to be a pop star from the age of about 15, 16. And I was the person that looked after all the equipment and buying and selling it and so on. And not within the band, but at least buying it on music. I was going to say eBay. There was no eBay, but it was like Melody Maker and other shops and so on, with my parents' help. Very lucky to get that help, and then buying equipment, selling it, and so on. So, I also I still got them, Alex. To this day, I've got folders showing the accounts of the band that I was in, and I was the drummer, I was the band. So I organized everything. It was a natural thing, not only organizing the bloody band and keeping them on track and on time, which I do to this day with my clients, but also in terms of the equipment and money and so on. So I think that was there from an early age as well.
And then, so would you put yourself, I hate pigeonholing, but it just so people get a sense, detail, planning, you're in that sort of part of the business world, which is fantastic. You're my favorite kind of people, because I'm not. Detail is my worst thing.
The partnership.
I surround myself with detailed people now. You guys used to drive me mad. Now I'm like, you're the best thing ever. It's that whole world, isn't it, of embracing what we're not.
Yeah, exactly. And building a team that is the right team for that objective, whatever it is you're trying to do. Me too, same. I couldn't manage without a team around me, never have. So yeah, that's the same for everybody, I think.
And when you left, did you do, so I left school at 15, so I don't even have an A-level. So did you do A-level, university, college?
Nah.
Where did you go? What did you do?
No. My parents spent a lot of money on me, sending me to St. Paul's School. And, there was obviously I had the potential, but I just, no way. I hated academia, Alex, hated chalk and talk. I couldn't bear sitting there just listening to people drone on and exams and why bother. And I knew I didn't want to go to uni. And I remember still to this day, my in an English class in A-level, I think this was, studying one of the Shakespeare plays. And what I naively thought was a proper discussion about interpreting what the Shakespeare or whatever was wanted to say. and I piped up with some opinion about it, and the teacher stared me down and said, yes, Wick, that's all very well, but that's not what the examiners want to hear. And of course, it was all brick and a wall, because St. Paul's gets its reputation from Oxbridge entries and the numbers that it does brilliantly every year with Westminster and others. And I just wasn't a brick in the wall. I couldn't fit in with that. I had to get out and rebel against that. So from the school band, I then wanted to carry on after school, really trying to be serious about it. We had a manager and an agent. We were gigging around London. We had a following. And we were quite well known on the London gig scene. But in those days, this is the early 70s, I better say 1970s, you had to have a record deal. There was no such thing as Spotify. And so we'd get our A&R guys, artists and repertoire guys, to come along and see the band during school and then after it, and try to get a record deal. And so while doing that, I wanted to work. I wanted to go into the world of work and see what it was like. And I got a job. A friend of mine was working in an ad agency and they needed a production assistant. And I went in and worked in Fleet Street, a place called Streets Advertising, which are about 20-25 people. And to your point, I started organizing everything.
Yeah.
And they loved that. They needed it. Yeah. And in the evenings, we were doing gigging and recording. And we had a really lucky break, because I think his name was Steve Jones, vaguely remember him, could be Steve Owen, who was the sound engineer for Pete Townsend, came to see us at gigging, and he loved the band, which was called Titus Oates, by the way, Titus Oates. I've got a photo on my website, of publicity photo of that in those days. And it was one of those names, a bit like Jethro Tull, where you're supposed to have sort of heard of it. I've heard that name vaguely. Oh yes, I think I've heard of them. That's why Jethro Tull picked that name. So Titus is a real historical figure with a 4-piece band, bass, drums, guitar, and a singer. And this Steve came to see us. He really loved us. He said, "I'd like to help you. I've got access to Olympic Studios and Pete Townsend's recording place, which in those days was in Goring, a place called the Temple." He said, "If you're prepared to record at midnight till 6 a.m, I've got the keys to these places and I'll let you in." So we did our demo tapes at Olympic Studios, where David Bowie and the Beatles and all sorts of other places, not the Beatles, no, they were at Abbey Road, but I think Paul McCartney recorded there, and Led Zeppelin, huge bands were in the same studios. So even though the music probably, wasn't picked up at that time by a record deal, we had a great sounding demo tapes. And so I did 2 jobs, Alex. I did a ad agency and then computer programming, which I hated. And I was a bit arrogant and thought, bugger this, I can do better. I'm going to start my own business. My grandparents did. And it went from there. That's when I started my first business, age 21.
Yeah. And what were you doing in this business? What was the product?
Well, no planning. It happened naturally that where my band was rehearsing, a place called the Tunnel in Waterloo, Tunnel Rehearsal Studio was under the arches where all the trains used to go for coming out from Waterloo Station. And there were offices and various workshops under the arches there. And my then partner built a rehearsal studio there. So we used to rent. I noticed, I got friendly with the owner, that every band that would come in there would bring hard equipment. And I said to the rehearsal studio owner, Mark, why don't we buy some sound equipment, bits and pieces? We can borrow some money from our parents, and then we'll start renting it out. Because I know he told me that the most profitable part of the rehearsal studio wasn't renting the room out; it was actually the slot machine. So it wasn't making a lot of money.
Yeah.
Now the mid 70s. And so we started this business renting sound equipment to the bands that came. They were well known. Status Quo, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, the Drifters would come and rehearse there, and they had money to rent this stuff. So we each got a loan of £2,500 from each of our parents, 1976, and we started our first business. And we wondered, what do we call it? Now, we're both 5'5.5". The half is very important. And we thought, I know, we've both got, 20s. We've got silly sense of humor. So we'll call the company Muscle Music. And that's what we called it. And then the logo was something like us two little guys picking up a big sound cabinet or something.
Brilliant.
And it went really well. And then it came to a horrible decision, one of the most difficult decisions ever. And that was one of the bands that rehearsed in the studio was called Colosseum 2. And they said, we want to go out on tour with your equipment. We also want to rent sound and lighting equipment, PA equipment. And Alan, we noticed you do a really good job with the mixing in the studio and the rehearsal and the recording. We'd like you to come out with us and mix the sound. And that gave me a horrible decision to make. Band, drumming, love. We're going to be pop stars one day, or business. Couldn't do both. Had to make a choice. Yeah. And the head won, not the heart on that one. And so I gave up trying to be a pop star, went on tour with Colosseum 2, and then the company carried on growing very, very well during the late 70s. And the highlight of those times was that I had an idea, and this is something that is a bit of a theme in my career. I always wanted to do things differently from competitors and find something. It was something my father taught me. Find some kind of USP. He didn't call it that, but be different, something like that. And I noticed that all the other PA systems that were going out with the bands focused on the out front sound for the audience, and very little attention was given to the sound on stage, what the musicians heard in those days. I thought, I wonder if we invest a lot of money on the sound that the musicians hear, whether that will give us a point of difference, and people will say, oh yeah, Muscle Music, they're the people who've got a really good on-stage monitoring system. Maybe that'll give us an advantage. And it worked. It worked because it started to attract more and more bands that really wanted to hear themselves clearly on stage. And the best win of all was the Jam. And they had heard, and Paul Weller was deaf in one ear from the amount of volume that had been on stage.
Wow.
Not many, it wasn't a secret, but not many people knew.
Yeah.
So he said, we want to give this Muscle Music stuff a try. And they did. And Paul said, it's amazing. I can hear everything now. I want this one. So I became the Jam's live sound engineer all through the late 70s, renting all of our equipment over and over and over again, and toured around the world with them. And meanwhile, our turnover and profits were going up and up and up with this competitive difference that we had. And that became the first company and my first, real experience of growing a business, and also having a huge amount of fun going around the world with these bands, the Jam in particular, mixing their sound. And the best bit of all, actually, I forgot to mention, is that I was still playing the drums, but with the clients, because they need to do sound checks every afternoon. And the drummers, whichever band I was working with, would say, how do the drums sound to the sound engineer in the band? Usually they say, we don't know. It sounds okay out there. They'd say to me, come on then, up you go.
Amazing.
I'm going out into the audience in these huge stadiums, auditoriums, and I get to jam, no pun intended, with whatever band it was, and have this great time hitting the drums in these huge places we never would have done. I'd love to have done actually with Titus Oates, but for fun, instead of having to worry about getting every note right.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how rock and roll, excuse the pun, right? It's like, so although you made a big choice, but actually the payoff was you still got a lot of the world that you were in as a band, but just in a different aspect. So you managed to keep a lot of the aspects there. It wasn't like go and be an accountant or be in a band. You know, you stayed in the industry, which was magic.
Yeah.
What a I didn't expect the conversation to go here. That is just, you know, what an epic foray and a brilliant. Do you know what I love about this story the most? Is that you've managed to talk about something that's incredibly fun, and you were doing a business. And so many people, you know, they come on my programs and they've got this, you know, the proper job, and they need to do something serious, and I need to do adulting. I'm like, no, don't. And so I love it when there's a real life example of look, and it succeeded and it works, all of that world. So what did you do? What did you do next? So that was very intensive on people were also buying you as well, I'm guessing, right? They weren't just buying the idea and what you did. They were buying you as a person. So where did you go with that business then? Did it get to a point where you stopped, or did you manage to carry on without being in it, or what did you do?
Concord came into play.
Okay.
Yeah, it's amazing. You couldn't make this up, but it's a true story. What my partner Mark and I discovered, and they also bought Mark. Mark at the time, my then business partner, was also very, very good. Don't want to leave him out. And also to the point that of having a balance in a team, and what he could do and I could do, and so on, went together very, very well. And what we noticed with the business side was that it was very cash intensive, Alex. It needed, every time we bought equipment to rent out, within 6 months, somebody had invented something new, which our clients would want, like a new toy. And so I remember I think in the first year or 18 months of the business, suddenly running out of money and not being able to pay the staff. Because we just didn't have the cash, and I didn't know that would happen. It came as a shock. I was 22, 23 years old. And so I went to my dad, who was still alive. He died young, but he was very much my mentor. I said, Dad, we've run out of money. What do we do? He said, okay, I'm sorry to hear that. Let me see if I can help. Let me have a look at your monthly management accounts and I'll help you. I said, what?
What's that?
What the hell are they? He looked at me with a look that was very, very angry and upset and frustrated, as dads can do. And I knew from that look that was a big fuck up. And therefore, the reason it all came as a shock was because we didn't know what was going on with the money. So he very kindly, as did my partner's parents, helped us through that month or two. And then we started to have accounting and bookkeeping and accounts, and that didn't happen again. But it really was a stretch to build that business beyond a certain point. And you know, I thought, I wonder whether maybe there's something better. And I'd heard that manufacturing sound equipment was maybe less so and more profitable in the long run. And by coincidence, and you know, the universe conspired to bring all this together. John Weller, Paul Weller's father, who managed the band, said to me, Alan, you know, we're paying you all this money, month in, month out, to rent all the equipment. And this was about 1979 by now. And our accountant has told us that Paul has got over £1 million cash in the bank. And this is 1979, so a lot of money,
back then.
Huge amount. And we've got to spend it and invest it to avoid or minimize tax.
That's
And look, I want to make you an offer. I want to buy all your equipment, the whole company in assets, and we'll also take your crew. And that was the first offer. And he offered £40,000 for everything. And we got a valuation, got help from an accountant, my father, who said, oh God, you really ought to get more like maybe 60, 70, ask for 80. So John was at 40, I was at 80. How are we going to square this circle? And we were joking and laughing and playing poker a lot as well at that time. He said, come on, why don't you put the whole company up? I said, no, forget it. Anyway, we're doing an American tour, and we came to the end of the American tour, and Going Underground went to #1 in England. And so the band had to get back to England that day, the end of the tour, a few days early, to be on Top of the Pops for the next day. And John said to me, come on, Alan, would you like to come on, I'll buy you a ticket, come with us on Concorde, and we can also talk about the deal and see what we can do. So of course I said yes, although it was a tough choice, because I'd met somebody rather interesting in Texas, and I was in Austin, Texas, spending time while this amazing woman was showing me all the benefits of being in Texas. So anyway, I had to make a choice, went back on Concorde, and John and I got more and more drunk sitting next to each other. We're eating more because there's endless champagne, endless drinks. And the rest of the band were with us, and the security guy, who needed 2 seats because he was so huge. So that cost them an arm and a leg. So we're getting more and more pissed. And in those days, Concorde, well, I think all the time, Concorde had an LED screen, a very small one, at the very front of the plane. And Concorde's very small, 2 seats either side, a narrow tube with a narrow gangway. And so we're looking out of the window. I still remember seeing the curvature of the earth, because it's amazing, the view. And John's going, come on, Alan, all right, 45. And I'm going, no, 80K, it's the minimum. Okay, maybe 75. And then anyway, we finally, I said to John, God, I wonder how high we are. And we both looked up at the LED screen, and it showed 60,000 feet.
Yeah.
And so we looked at each other, still pissed as hell. I said, oh, that's a good number. And that's how I did my first company sale, selling the whole business, the asset, to John Weller for 60K. Because we're at 60,000 feet up in the air.
In a Concorde. It's just even more. Well, it sounds so glamorous, doesn't it? And I'm sure it was hard work and slog and all the rest of it.
Yeah, so it was fun.
And how brilliant. And so there was you were talking about someone in Texas, in Austin, Texas. So did anything ever happen there? What was that?
Oh, sorry. I was kind of being, what's the word? I'm polite. No, that was a lovely young woman who I'd met on tour, and I should have been a little bit more clear about that. But we did. We stayed friends for quite some time, but that was all. No business involved whatsoever.
Well, it's a different area of your life. It's business. It's still business, just not business how we think of it.
Okay.
Brilliant. And so you've now grown, developed, sold a business, and it's so. I really thank you for sharing the detail, because I think when we hear words like growing and selling businesses, and upscaling and selling, it all sounds, even to me, and I haven't grown and sold a business, but I've had a catering company and I've run a pub, and I get the sense of it. And property isn't. I guess I've sold houses, but it's not a business that you grow and scale and sell. And even my coaching business now, it's not saleable. So it's an area I don't know. So when I'm hearing it, I'm like, oh, it sounds so, just out there. Like, I don't know anything about it. And when you told the story the way you have, it's like, oh, right, actually, that's what happens. And then when it's a bigger business, it happens on a grander scale, which I'm guessing is where you probably go next. What's the next? So you've sold that. So do they ask you to carry on working with and for them, or have you managed to sit and step away?
No, there was a very big change in my life at that point, and I knew that this was going to happen. And I made it clear to John that I couldn't come with, and luckily the employees of the company, it was only 3, it was a tiny company, 5 of us, and with 2 partners, 3 employees. Luckily, the employees went with the equipment and started working and became employees of the Jam. And they carried on. One of them, who'd been a guy called Bob, lovely guy, who was mixing the on-stage sound, was very talented, and he took over responsibilities all through the rest of the 80s, both with the Jam and then when the Jam broke up with Paul Weller and the bands he had in those days, and carried on mixing the upfront sound. Otherwise, it would have been a problem. It would have. So that was part of the deal, and luckily the crew were very happy to become employees of the Jam and then Paul Weller, because they were long-term relationship people, really, really nice, down-to-earth people, in a way not typical rock and roll in that sense. For example, they in sound check, they'd open up the venues to fans and they'd sit with them, chatting to them during the afternoon. That was unheard of from other bands who stayed distant. They were very, very much down to earth. So no, that carried on, which left me free. My partner and I carried on together doing some other things, but I then went to move to New York at that time for personal reasons, a long story. But that meant that with the money from the Jam and that 60K, we reinvested the money into manufacturing sound equipment. But when I say manufacturing, on a very, very small scale, making 1 or 2 cabinets. And there's another important piece of the story, which I think is I mustn't leave out, it's not fair to the people concerned, was that during the last year or two of Muscle Music and working with the Jam, I was always on the lookout for better equipment, because I was renting stuff all around the world. And I'd heard about this amazing designer, a little bit like a Joni Ive of Apple, except for sound, called Tony Andrews, genius in terms of sound design. And he'd made this incredible sounding equipment, which was much better than anything I'd been able to come up with. And the brand name is still to this day Turbo Sound, one word, Turbo Sound. And they'd been supplying the PA systems for Glastonbury and Status Quo for several years. And it was and I rented it for the Jam, and I was blown away with it. And they hadn't had much success commercially. So I said to Tony, look, we've now got this cash from the Jam. You're a genius. I think if we team up together, we could really go places. And he agreed. And so we formed a new company together in 1980, 81, that sort of period, which was going to start making stuff. And at that time, they also had a rental business. And when I say manufacturing, they had a farm, they had an army hut. And in the army hut, we started making tiny amounts of equipment, and it started to take off organically. That's all the money we had, but it gradually started to take off. And our first big order came from Australia, and we managed to sell an entire container full of equipment to Australia. And I remember going out there, somewhere around that period, to support it in Australia, and that was amazing. And during the early part of the 80s, I said, I'm going to get going. I was the only free guy who wasn't married everyone else was married and or with kids. And I said, come on, let's go and conquer America, as you do when you're 26, 27, 28. I had no clue about risks whatsoever. We're going to conquer America. And I flew over there, started living in New York, and started Turbo Sound in New York. And thanks to contacts we had there, that took off very well. And that became our biggest market within 3 or 4 years. Sorry, I'm going on way all over the place here.
No, it's great. It's absolutely brilliant. So I do have a question: that how did sales differ then? Because I think, especially I'm lucky and you're lucky that we're in a generation where we managed without technology. You know, I started buying houses when I was 22, and Rightmove didn't exist. The internet wasn't there. All of that world. Sorry, 26, which was 2006. It was like just starting to come. But you know, you're talking about the 80s and 90s where it wasn't even coming in. I mean, it's a different world of that. And what I'm fascinated by is that now a lot of the narrative is, you have to be on the web, you have to have a sales funnel, you have to do that. And one of my favorite ways of selling is speaking to people and going networking, which is old school, but it works. So what was it back then? Like, how did you end up selling to Australia? Like, what were you doing? Is this networking, connecting, speaking to people?
Trade shows.
It's so important for people to remember, actually, that really works.
All of that, networking, talking to people, trade shows as well, which were attended by distributors around the world who were our clients, our customers. So we decided to do all of our selling through dealers, distributors around the world. And I started the first distribution company in America. Then I went to Japan and started another one there with a joint venture with another company. And that meant that we may not be what I'd call today first degree connections with people, but we were building connections with people who had really good other connections themselves. So it was a bit of both. And also it was a very small industry, tiny, maybe a few hundred people controlled professional sound equipment, which was only a few £100 million sales worldwide, with all the established companies that had been around for years: Electro Voice, JBL, Yamaha, others that have been around 100 years, since the dawn of sound for cinemas and so on. So they were the companies that then extended into professional audio. So it was very much people hearing, oh, that Turbo Sound stuff's got a good reputation. It's been in Glastonbury. Maybe we ought to investigate it. So it was like that.
And so you went, and again, thank you for clarifying that when you said manufacturing, it's another one of those words that I just go, oh my God, big factories, huge scale. You know, thank you for clarifying, like you're literally in a just starting. Because I think we forget, you know, people forget where businesses came from, and including the huge businesses that are around today. So you end up in Australia, Japan, becoming well known. What happens next? What do you do with it? How far do you go?
Well, it grew very well. I mean, the 80s was a very positive time for businesses generally, and the designs that Tony came up with were sensational, Alex. Really, really, genuinely better. And our mission at that time, we had a purpose. I didn't know, even the word mission and purpose I'm using now, we didn't know those words. But the idea was that in those days, very, very loud sound would tend to leave audiences with their ears ringing when they left gigs. And if you think of the Iron Maidens and so on, those sort of big bands that were touring, doing Nebworth and Glastonbury, really, and those sorts of people. So what Tony was very good at was coming up with designs that were as loud or even louder, but they didn't leave audiences with their ears ringing. And they were smaller than the competition. And when you go on the road, it's very expensive for bands to pay for trucks and crew and all that. So if you could come up with designs that made as much sound and were cleaner, less distorted, and would cost groups and less money, and the rental companies less money, you're onto a winner. So that's why the business kept on growing, and from an army hut to a tiny little unit, but on an estate, and then from a tiny little unit a few years later to a bigger unit on a bigger estate. So it grew like that. And then we merged with another company, and this was now the mid-80s. We got distribution up and running. TurboSound was growing very well. I was living in the States. That was growing very, very well. And all was good. However, there was consolidation beginning to take place in the industry, and we were like a Ferrari being looked at by a Fiat type of thing. We were very leading McLaren, Ferrari type of stuff, and the big General Motors and Fiats and so on were looking at the little companies to see if there were some stars they could pick up and buy. And so one of the companies we did a lot of things together with made complementary equipment. We were making the loudspeakers on the big speakers and this other company called BSS made electronics, and they sold to Abbey Road and BBC and also all around the world. Established, very talented designer called Chaz Brook. He's still around today, working with alpacas is what he does now, which is another story. And absolute lovely change of life. And we did a merger together, and we had this dream that we were going to make a group of companies, each the best in their field, microphones, amplifiers, speakers, mixing consoles. And we would therefore have like a mini group of top quality brands that we would have. So we called the group company Edge Technology Group Limited. And by now we were probably up to about 60 or 70 people with a couple of factories. And it carried on growing. We needed investment, though. We realized we needed more cash to do what we wanted. And this is something I often advise to people these days. They go, oh, no, we've got to go out to private equity, or we've got to sell equity, or we've got to give things where we'll get big loans. Oh, by the way, among all the people now involved with Edge Technology, none of us was really financial. Really, honestly, our talents were in design, sales, marketing. So I know, and we had, I forgot to mention that I had a really good mentor, amazing guy called Mike O'Flynn, who had worked for Pfizer, for Gillette in senior roles, and then did mentoring. And luckily enough, I was introduced to him. He became my mentor. But unfortunately, my father sadly died very young, and I needed a mentor. And that's something I advise strongly to any startups, any early stage. Get people with gray hairs, whether it's in the family, you don't have to pay for it or pay somebody. So Mike O'Flynn said, the ideal solution, which is something I advise these days, is an individual and who's got the talents and skills you want with cash. And so we brought in a very talented financial guy who had 100K of cash, which we sold him. I seem to remember 10% of the company. And that was a really ideal combination. With that money, we then got bigger factories and then started a third one in Sheffield, with the Margaret Thatcher scheme for helping people in those areas. And so we got a factory for free. And each time we took on an employee, we were given £3,000 cash by the government. So that was our third factory. So by the late 80s, I think, 89, 90, we were 100 people, 3 factories, a head office, still growing well. I think our turnover was about 4 or 5 mil, making, I think, about $750,000 profit, and going like gangbusters. Now that's all the good news. There's the numbers, the paperwork. The bad news, the thing that I couldn't handle anymore, was that there were 6 partners, none of whom had a majority stake. And I was spending more than half my time trying to keep everyone together. I'm part of the problem too. I'm not denying it. We've all got strong egos and have strong opinions. And really, we were really fighting all the time over, it doesn't matter really who's right or wrong. The fact is we just weren't getting on. And it's something that I've come to call in later years partneritis. It's a disease, partneritis. And anyway, we couldn't handle it anymore. And it's a real shame, Alex, that this had to happen. We need to sell the business. And 4 out of the 6 of us think we sell the business, we'll be okay. We'll sell it, we're out. And 2 didn't. Anyway, long story short, we sold the business at a time when it was still growing very well. It was too early. But from a happiness point of view and getting out of all that bad energy, for me personally, it was a good thing to do. So in 1990, we sold the business to a microphone company called AKG, which some listeners may have heard of. And I left, and the others carried on with it. Yeah.
Okay. And they stayed, but the business had been sold?
Yeah, they stayed with the businesses. I'm afraid I was very ill. I got ME from all the stress, and I had to take a year out. So I just needed to break. So I left. Yeah.
It's huge, right? It's not spoken about, I don't think, enough in the business world about the human cost. You know, we talk about the numbers, and accounting can show all sorts of wonderful things, but we don't deal with the human cost and the emotional cost and the psychological cost and all of that. And actually, that's as important, if not more important, I would say. I mean, it's so interesting you say that about partneritis. One of my kind of, it's probably more of an internal joke, although I'm about to say it on this podcast, with my joint venture groups who are joint venturing in property. I spend more time managing the relationships and the communication between them than we do on the property. The property is actually quite easy. The business is relatively easy. The people part of the business, and having 3 or 4 people on a shared goal and staying and keeping on track and all of that world, it really takes something. So it's, and that's kind of, you know, I didn't do my business thinking like that, oh, this is going to be a problem, I need to do that. It's kind of, I've grown my business alongside the people I coach, and I've realized that out of doing it. So it's actually really nice to hear that it's like, oh, this is a thing. Like all size companies deal with it. You know, most joint ventures that I know of, they fall apart because of the people. The business is fine. But it's the people and the lack of communication. And so I guess it's the same in any team, the communication side of it.
Exactly.
So you took some time out?
Yeah, a year.
Yeah. And were you bought out? So did the other guys stay?
Yes.
Although the business was sold, they stayed as effectively employees rather than partners? Or
correct. Yes.
Yeah. So you've sold out, you're out, you take some time to recover.
Yes.
And do you still deal with anything now from that, or are you what you would call fully recovered and fine, or is it?
Nothing from that episode, but I did have another episode more recently, which was more of a medical thing, which was that in my right side, about 5 or 6 years ago, my right side just suddenly stopped working when I was in my flat in London, family homes in Sussex. And that was very scary. I've had to deal with that. That was a hospital job, and not knowing what the hell was going on. That's, but that was 6 years ago. So nothing that I'm aware of from that time, no.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting, so I come from the world of, I've got homeopaths in my family, a strong believer in energy work, yoga, all of that work. And your wife she's a yoga instructor, right? And it was really interesting when I came on your show and you were like the Feldenkrais movement stuff. I was like, I know what that is. I've been on that. It's amazing. So I think what's really interesting is that actually when we deal with our health and take care of ourselves, it doesn't have to go on. But when we don't deal with it, you know, one of the biggest things I say with my clients is if they've got physical symptoms, it's like, let's have a look.
Yes,
Where is it coming from?
Yes.
What's the stress causing it? And heal and deal with the stress rather than you know, treating the symptoms over the top. So did you know what you were doing back then when you took, you know, you kind of left that and took the time? Were you aware? Were you doing it in that way? Or were you just like, physically can't do anything, I've got to get out?
I think I was following doctors and consultants' orders, really. Yeah. More than anything else. No, I didn't have that knowledge, insights that you're talking about now. Not really. No.
When you look, so, and I believe there's no coincidences. Lots of people do, but the ME and that physical symptoms was to do with the stress. Are you kind of clear that was
yes,
what
caused it? Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. And I'm very lucky that this is now 90s. That I lived at that time in Northwest London, and there was Dr. Willie Weir, who was a pioneer in ME. It was still not accepted in those days at all by GPs or widely, and he worked in Barnet Hospital near us, in a hospital there, and my GP by luck recommended him, and thinking that we heard of this weird thing and it might be something to do with it, and he then diagnosed it and gave it a name, and then gave me really good advice on what to do, which was nothing. And I followed it, and luckily, you know, I was in the lucky position financially of being able to do that, and it worked. Just very light exercise, no work, nothing, take it easy. And, you know, it may be like lifelong, or you might have it might be an episode. And luckily it was an episode of about 9 months or a year where it gradually wore off. But I know people with ME who unlucky have it for life, but no, that wore off.
Yeah, amazing. And I don't think we can underestimate, because you did nothing. You know, this idea that we're human beings, not human doings. And it's so ingrained. I'm ill, I must do something. It's like no, in the words of Wim Hof, let the body do what the body does. Let it and heal. So amazing.
But if, I mean, for the majority of people who haven't got that choice because they have to work to earn money, then I can't imagine how hard that is. And there's no way I would have been able to, I don't think, recover that quickly without doing nothing for a while. Yeah.
Which it's such a paradox then, isn't it? Because actually, if you've got to keep working, you're going to keep all of everything persisting. Whereas when you can actually just go, okay, I surrender. You know, I'm going to stop. And so I just want to touch on, so early 90s, huge financial upheaval, house prices, interest rates, all of that world. Did that impact the business that you were in and that you came out of, or did you come out of it before? What happened in the sense of larger?
Well, all three brands that my babies carried on doing well, and they're still flourishing today with new parents. So that's the thing I'm proudest of, Alex, that they carried on doing well. They're you know, the turnover has been huge. The sales have been huge, and the sales every year now from all three are still going very strong. So no is the answer. They carried on doing well, and I think the reason that they did is that the brands were all premium, top of the market, very innovative, and carried on like that. There was a lull, which is another part of the story, when the business that bought one of our businesses then itself was bought by an American conglomerate, and $1.5 billion a turnover company called Harman International or Harman Industries, and they then stopped the innovation in one of the companies and did a kind of asset strip of stopping the marketing, stopping the innovation, taking the profits. And I then bought the business back. One of the babies I bought back in 1998. I got involved with another company for 7 years in the interim and was not really enjoying it that much. It went well, it grew in a totally different industry, and I missed my baby. I loved dBs and kilohertz and the mixing, the sound of the music, as my heart was at that time. And I did no due diligence. I got backing from private equity and bank, paid a lot of money and put a lot of my own money into buying it back. Turbo Sound this is, and it was a heart over head decision, and the business was on paper doing very well. I think by that time it was doing about $1 million profit, 5 million turnover, and I dived back in, and I discovered within a few months, 6 months or so, that the business was really struggling. It really was. That was just the shiny outside. The inside was really not good. And so 4 years, and this is where I got more business experience, Alex, than all the other years put together, because I'd never done a turnaround before. I didn't know what it was. And to discover something like a wounded animal, and you've got to kind of patch it up and bring it back to life again, was very hard work. 4 years of ridiculous stress. And very luckily, we'd overfunded the deal. So there was never no cash or, any fear of going bankrupt. But the company where I went into a freaking lift thinking I'd stay on that floor and that I'd take a year or two and I'd start taking the lift up. I got in the lift, the doors closed and it went down, even though I was pressing all the freaking buttons to go up. And it was really tough, really hard work. But those 4 years, I learned so much. And
that's a great point, right? Because people think, oh God, failure, all of that world, it's hard, it's going wrong. It's like, that's where we do learn the most. And all of us, probably including me, we try and avoid it. No one wants to go down when you want to go up, right? No one wants that. But actually, we come out looking at the other side going, wow, I learned more in that 4 years than the entire time when it was going well. I had a session with my coach before we came on, and she gave me I have a coach that I work with every week, and I absolutely advocate you saying, like, have a mentor, have people you work with, all of that world. I mean, even this podcast, actually speaking to people like you and all the other guests I've had, I learned so much. And she gave me that. I've even got my notes here because it was literally before, and it says, focus, discipline, fail, start again. Focus, discipline, fail. She said sometimes we'll get success, but
that's it. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it's a huge, I think it's a huge thing for people to get, people listening to this who are, thinking of getting into their own business or following something, actually embracing failure or not, I mean, I wouldn't go out in search of it just to get the learning, but actually getting that when it happens, there's so much gold in there to take forward. It's magical. And at the time, it feels like hell on earth coming out the other side. I think that, I guess the thing for me, and from a property area is probably where I'd speak from in this. When deals are going wrong, I've had groups. It's that I've had groups that they've failed at a deal. We've lost money on a deal. We've come out after 2 years with no extra profit. We've spent 2 years of time and sold out at the same price, or same price plus costs, effectively. And yet the learning, you can't put a price on it, but it's so intangible. It's so, when we make a profit, we go, I did this and I got this much money. Yay. When we go, I did this and I got no money out. It's this funny thing of, even in a sales point of view, this group that I'm thinking of now, they've also just had a massive success. They bought 31 flats, only put 60 grand down. Sounds great. Like, wow, how do you do that? They're the same group that for 2 years prior made basically no money and spent loads of time. And Yes, interesting. So where's that company now? So you spent 4 years trying to manually pull the elevator back up. And then so I have a question actually before we go on to that. What's your wisdom around businesses? Because this has come up a lot so far around knowing the numbers, which I couldn't agree with you more. Some of my groups hate me for that. Like, no, we're doing money spreadsheets. We're going to talk about money. And, I really have to drag myself into that conversation as well. It's not my favorite place to be. And I realize how important it is. So I do it. And we've talked about cash flow and having enough money. Have you got rules or things that you do where you go, we have to keep a certain amount back, or we have to keep a percentage? Or how do you actually put that into practice so that, as well as knowing the numbers, there's also dealing with that? Like, what do you say? I mean, this is au general now. I know every business is different, but have you got some ground rules, or I don't know what you'd call them, standards for how companies starting out can not overstretch or not deal with a cash flow issue that is not going to help?
It goes back to a number of pieces of the puzzle. It's a great question. I start with attitude to risk. Okay. So the psychology of the people involved, owner or owners, and working that out, and helping them with not only their attitude to risk about cash and investment, but also where are they trying to get to. If we use extremes to try to make it clearer, if at one extreme there's an owner or owners who are perfectly happy to get to a certain level of turnover and a certain level of profit, and then that's fine for the rest of their lives. They want to make money, make a living. They want to be independent, autonomous. They want to do their own thing, not have a boss. And that's fine. And that's one aim. Fine. Yeah. Then there's the other extreme where the owner or owners are imagining a unicorn. They really believe that what they're doing can one day become a unicorn. It could one day be $1 billion pound business, maybe. That's what they're imagining. And those two extremes of wishes of what they want, that dictates a lot to do with cash and how much to hold, how much do they need, when do they need it. That's a piece of the puzzle. Then if you combine that with attitude to risk, that then dictates from there whether or not at one extreme we always want 1 year of overhead in the bank. No matter what size we are, we always will have a year's worth of cash. I call that very low risk, attitude to risk, very low, almost cash under the duvet. That's it, under the mattress. It's that extreme. And then at the other extreme, with a big plan, big dreams, I don't care, I'm going to go get there or bust. They are going to borrow loads of money. They'll borrow. They're no problem putting their house on the line. No problem. No problem selling equity, because they know that they'd rather have 1% of a £1 billion company than 100% of nothing. And so that illustrates an extremely wide spectrum, Alex. And so I think my job as a coach advisor to clients is to help them work out what will make them happy.
I love that you said that.
It's really important. I do not believe in the apprentice dragon's den bollocks of bigger, better, tomorrow, money, money, money. Fine. That may be fine for some people. If that's what they want for them to be happy, no problem. I'll help them get there. However, if happiness looks like something else for them, that's another wish. Help them get there. No judgment. I remember with one client who had 100 people, taken him 10 years to build up a services company. I got hired because the owner, single guy, one owner, 100%, hated it. He was really hating managing 100 people. He said, I loved it when my company was 5 or 6 people in a single office. We all looked at each other and I just enjoyed it more. Can you help me reduce the size of the business from 100 back to 5 or 6? However, I care about all my employees. A lot of them got mortgages. I want to do this in a very slow way. 3 years later, 3 years, gradually. And he was as happy as Larry. And that's the opposite of quote unquote business success. I call that business success for that owner, just as much as selling out, which I helped a client do last year for 10.5 million for retirement. They're happy with that. It's happy. They're both happy.
Yeah. You've made me so happy saying that, because it's so, it's one of the things I say to people. I'm like, look, money without happiness is pointless. Like, what's the point? Like, literally, what's the point? And the percentage of people whose highest value is money is so tiny, and yet we measure it as a metric rather than happiness. You've made me happy just saying that. And I'm also going, oh, I'm not mad. I'm not on my own. There's this lone happiness warrior. There's others.
Indeed, we're a tribe.
It's just brilliant. And I think probably really freeing to people who listen to this, who go, like, you've literally just given them permission to do the business their way.
Yeah. Otherwise, why the hell bother? Why go into business? Why be in control? Why are you being in control of something and then not going with what makes you happy rather than shoulds?
Yeah. It's huge. Where do we go next? So you've done all of that. What's next? We had a little, sorry, I just wanted to foray into the how do people work with the cash flow and decide? And it's a brilliant answer. And I love that it's like, well, who's the person? How are they? What's their risk? All of that. It's brilliant. Right time, right advice, right person, rather than do this or we're all the same. It's great. What did you do next?
At that point, so I managed to turn the Turbo Sam round. It was sold. I didn't make money on the large investment that I put in, but I didn't lose money. I got my money back. But to me, it felt like an absolute, and the company didn't go bankrupt. It could have done in the second or third year, really run out of money, and turned it back round to profitable and growing again. And it felt like a failure, though. It felt like one, even though it didn't go under. It was a huge blow to my self-confidence. What an idiot I felt for buying the bloody thing back. Stupid, failure, idiot, mad. I didn't do due diligence, which I knew for 20 years, 30 years, you've got to do due diligence, head and heart. I just got led by my heart wanting my baby back. And so I just lost my confidence. And again, I was in lucky position not to need to work, and just reflected and felt tired. I wasn't ill at that time. I just felt ill, felt tired. I felt ill, even though I wasn't. And I got to do nothing and crawl under the duvet. And I was very depressed, very down. And thought that's it, useless. I'm useless. All of that, really, really down. And then maybe 3 or 4 months after coming out of that business, a friend who had inherited a huge amount of money from his late father at that time, and had invested in a lot of different businesses, said to me, Alan, if you're not doing anything, can you spare a bit of time to come in and advise me? And I don't know what to do, all these businesses I've created, which to keep or chuck. And I need an objective eye. And it's light work. It's half a day or a day a month. I thought, oh, well, I'll see if I'm any good at this, if I can help. And I told him, he knew how I felt. He said, come on, you can do it. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. The objectivity, the lack of responsibility. And I discovered, which I didn't know, because I'd been a classic driving boss owner before, that with somebody else's business, I could be very diplomatic, which I didn't know. And then another friend asked me the same a few months later. Thought, oh, I'm really enjoying this. And with it about a year, so this is now the early noughties, I thought, this is going well, and it's less stressful, and I'm good at it, and I get well paid for it. So that next step, Alex, happened totally organically, without any planning, of becoming an advisor, consultant. I wasn't coaching in those days. I didn't know what that was really. And that's how that grew. And then within a year or so, I had maybe 5 or 6 clients, and it became a business, working from home.
And how did you decide how to charge for that when it was new and you hadn't done it before? Or did they come to you saying, we've got this budget? How did you do that? It's a big question with a lot of my clients. How do we decide? How do we know what to charge with any kind of business that's not, well, there's a manufacturing cost and you add this profit on and it's going to cost you this to sell. How did you do that?
Well, after the era of which of course turned into huge learnings, to the points philosophically, by the time it hurts like hell, of what had happened with Turbo Sound, I knew that I would do some freaking research. So I did the research. I asked around. I looked at any information I could get. I think, where are we now? I could do some research on the net, whatever it was in those days. I don't remember. Alta Vista or something that comes to mind. And then I found a rate that seemed to be okay and reasonable. And that was acceptable to my clients at that time.
And then, so you started doing that. It's now becoming a business because you've got 5 clients and it's working and you're enjoying it. What happens next?
That has carried on till today, really, in one form or another. I discovered after 3 or 4 years that I felt lonely. And I knew by then I'm unemployable, which I'd been since the age of 18 or 19, 20, totally unemployable. I cannot take orders, forget it. I can do my own thing or die. And but without a team and people to push around and be a horrible boss with, which I was then, in those days, what can I do? So, and I've had no training at all to be a consultant or advisor. And the other big learning that happened in parallel was that I wanted to give back and find ways of helping others. And I came across an amazing charity, which is still going strong today, called Pilot Light, one word, Pilot Light. And it's a great name because what it does is it mentors and coaches small charities for free. And it does that by attracting experienced business people who are happy to pay a fairly large amount to them every year to be a member in it. And then they become the advisors that are paired, that Pilot Light pairs with the charity. And I discovered I really loved that. And that I then got an introduction into coaching, because they said, don't tell them what to do. These charities, the boards of these charities, ask questions. But I know what they need to do. No.
They just need to do it.
Yes. Tomorrow. Come on. What's holding you back, for God's sake? No, you're not allowed to do that. You have to ask questions. Why? They then learn. So tested my patience, but there was always people from Pilot Light around with every meeting, with every charity. And there would be 1 or 2 pilot lighters, depending on the size of the charity, going along every month. And I called it advice, but it wasn't. It was coaching. It was real coaching, mentoring. Now, this is really good. My God, these people, when they get a light bulb moment, it's amazing. I felt on top of the world, more satisfaction than anything I'd ever done. My wife used to tell, "You've been at Pilot Light, haven't you?" When I used to come home, so I had this kind of glow from that type of work. I thought, bugger it, I need to get trained in this. So, and I want to be with a team. And so I did, again, lots of research, met a whole lot of people, and I ended up joining a coaching organization that was worldwide at that time, and they offered formal training in coaching, which would be an investment in the first few months, and then every month training how to coach, and frameworks and so on. Had a team around me of people who I could do coaching with, and I was still my own boss because it was a licensing deal, so it's still my own company, and it meant I was still free. And that's what happened next. I was with them 6 or 7 years, and that really taught me a lot, Alex. I learned a huge amount, worked with other people on amazing projects I'd never have worked on my own. For example, I worked with the very beginnings of Over Energy, and they, of course, have become huge over the years, which I never would have done as just Alan Wick. It was good that I had the brand together with what I was offering. And my rates, the other thing I got was mentoring there. And thanks to mentoring I got within the company, with people kicking me out the backside, telling me I'm worth more than what I am charging going in. And gradually, as each year went by, I raised my rates. I don't know if anybody's still here. If they're listening, put it in the chat. But Alex has disappeared. I assume she's coming back soon.
We're back.
Oh, hi there.
That was really bizarre. Hello again. My
Hello.
computer, StreamYard just went, no, we're not playing.
Oh,
No idea what happened. Sorry, folks. Sorry, Alex. We're back.
okay.
This is where the joys of live is like, no, it's gone wrong. Whereas if we were just recording, it'd be like, no bother, we'll get back in so we can. Yes, this is all a new learning for me. It's brilliant. Just as we were talking about learning and things going wrong, I love it. And now my computer's doing all kinds of things because it's restarted. Bear with me.
No problem. Take your time.
Get rid of all these bits. There we go. And we're still live. Cool. All right. We were just talking about where you are now, building a business, and this is where I'm. It's a fascination for me. So, and I have it that if I get value, my listeners will. That's what I tell myself anyway, so that I can ask the questions that I really want to ask, not that I think I should ask. So you now are building a completely different business. I think a bit like how my business is, where it's really based on me. There's no. If I stop working, my business is not a business, which is kind of ironic when I'm teaching financial freedom and passive income. So now really I am doing business that I love because I don't have to type thing. So how do you see that? How do you reconcile that? How do you, I'm terrible. I ask like 10 questions at a time. So I'll ask them all and then you can pick which one to answer. So I get very excited and I go, what about this? What about this? What about this? So my question and where I'm at for myself is I'm kind of fully booked. Every year I have another program that brings new clients in. My upside and my downside is client retention. So then I don't have the revolving door doesn't have anyone going out of it. Everyone keeps coming in and not leaving. So it's growing. I have it that you're probably ahead of me or in a different space, but we're in the same kind of business. So what do you say about, and not just to me and my business, but people who are listening to this, who they are their business? How do we reconcile that? How do we grow? How do we balance? What do you speak into that world? How do you do it? What's your business like now, and how does it differ to manufacturing or something that you can actually sell?
Well, I think the starting point was why I'm doing it. And I think that's what's really key for everybody who's solopreneur and even the word entrepreneur, and whether that fits anymore, because I had a why, a clear why for every business that I've been involved in. The one that I didn't mention that's worth mentioning because it relates to today is that was the one when I first sold the group and then got involved with a private equity house called 3i, and that was in the early 90s, and learned about buying and selling businesses much more. As one of they had what they called an MBI program, management buyout program, and they had about 100 entrepreneurs as part of it. And they invited people through networking that they knew had sold out or whatever and could work in other businesses. And the idea of it was that if we brought anything to 3i for their backing, they would be more likely to back it because they knew us and we were meeting regularly. And likewise, they often came up with offer deals that needed more capability than the company had, and they would pick one of the people on that group. And that led me to get involved with a company that was training hospitality, restaurants, hotels, pubs, the management training, senior management training. And I really had been involved in audio or sound or drumming for all these years. And I thought, I'm going to test myself. And there's another theme that I've done throughout my life of seeing if I heard about this thing called transferable skills. I thought, I'm going to do something totally different. Now, there was a slight family connection in that one of my father's businesses was a hotel in Israel. So I had a bit of a feel for that market. And over 8 years, we built up a business that was pure services that I'd never been involved in before. Mind you, I suppose you could, there were, even with the PA
Sound private services.
Yeah, there were things you could hold and touch. This was the first time. And so we did well. That business was successful. And our purpose, the reason why we did what we did, was we wanted to improve customer service in the UK hospitality market. We thought it really needed it. Now, it was the 1990s, and it really did. And so we had mystery shopping, we offered advice, and we trained. It was a lovely holistic approach. And our clients were all the very well-known hotel groups, restaurant groups, and so on. And that's where I first learned that you could make money selling something you couldn't touch or feel. So I did come into what I'm doing now with at least some experience of that. Now, that business grew and sold successfully, but that was the aim of the business. Now, when I came into this, what I'm doing now, this coaching, consulting, etc., which was organic, no plan. I really have a very different attitude towards it than I did before, which is this is the love, the satisfaction that I get from it week in, week out. I feel I've got the best job in the world. I joke with some of my clients, thank you, that was an amazing session. I should be paying you. And we laugh. And then I very quickly said, no, I was just joking. But it really, I mean, like I don't mean it, but I'll do this till I die. If I'm in hospital, I've discovered, I'll be asking the nurse and the doctors, what do you do? I always want to know what's under the surface. I hate small talk. I just go straight for underneath. What's underneath? I've been like that since I was a child. How do things work? So I'll do this forever. And therefore, and then the other piece of this is all the businesses I was involved with before this one. I was the midwife to amazingly talented people who were inventors or designers or creative people. And they were out front singing or playing lead guitar. And I was the drummer at the back, whichever. So this one, I've wanted to see. I wonder whether the Alan Wick can be a brand. I wonder whether I've got any value in myself, of myself, to the world. And this was a huge change for me. I never thought I could. I always thought I would find talented people and be the midwife and make them famous and make money together as a partner. This is a totally different attitude. So I've got no plans to build a business or sell out or anything like that. What I am doing year on year on year is that gradually my fees have gone up and up and up. I'm getting bigger and bigger projects that are valued a lot more, like the sale of my client's business last year for 10.5 million. So my fees, 6-figure fees, is nothing. It's still a lot of money for me, but it's nothing compared to the value that my clients got out of it, and they can retire on for the rest of their lives. So the real challenge here, Alex, is my own fear and my own confidence. Just how far can I go? And as an introvert, which is the thing you started with, really didn't have no website, no social media, nothing, no podcast, nothing, just purely on recommendation. That's it. That was it for 17 years, and working fine, no problem. However, when I had the stroke and I was in hospital for 10 days, for 6 weeks, and during the 10 days that we didn't know what was wrong and I might not come out of here alive. That's when I thought, you bloody idiot, you stupid, selfish, introverted idiot. You're keeping yourself small because of your fears of all raising my head above the parapet. And apparently you've got to be shouting. You've got to be shouting. You've got to have a photograph from the back of you with your arms in the air and an audience in the all their hands up going, wow, he's helped us make millions tomorrow. In a day they made millions from, and you've got to be like that. And there's no way I'm doing that bullshit hype bollocks. Forget it. Is that what you need? And then I gradually discovered,
brilliant,
with the help of a coach called Pete Mosley, who's written an amazing book called The Art of Shouting Quietly.
One to add to my list. I've not heard of that one. Okay.
Yeah. Well, you don't need it. You're an extrovert. You don't need it. You're natural. You're brilliant.
I suspect I might need it to help some of my clients, because I have, if I was as well from that point.
Yes, that would be useful. And then I gradually found out that you can, and I had a website. I remember the first website, Alex, that a friend of mine did, which just as a trial. I think anytime the font got bigger than 12 point, which is tiny, I go, no, too shouty, no. And everything was dark and very quiet. It was useless. And now my website, I mean, it's all, I can't believe it. I look at it and I think back to what I had. First website in 2018, I think. 4 years. I've come a long way doing this. No way at all, ever. Okay, I can do this in my own terms. And we're talking, I'm not bullshitting, nothing. That's all a big journey. So that is my journey, rather than building a business with it and then getting to a certain turnover like I used to do.
Yeah. Wow. And it's in the world of who you have to become.
Yes.
Who you've become to do this now is it's huge. It's really huge. And I say that to people about financial freedom. It's not about the money. It's who you've got to become to do what you want and get what you want and be who you want to be. And how do you work with people now? How do you do one-on-one? Do you do coaching programs and groups? How do you help people? So how do you do it without shouting from a stage and getting everyone to go rah 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 to loud music? How do you do that? What does it look like? So what kind of
it's all of the above, Alex. It depends on what kind of support clients need. It's one-to-one, meaning one of me to one business. Now the business might have thousands of people in it, but I still call that one-to-one in terms of one of me and one business. And I then am looking at the baby more than the parent. I'll start off really, really analyzing, and I've got a methodology that when I first start with most clients, not all, but most, I do something called a reality check. And a reality check, one client called it like an MRI for my business. And I'll do a one-off piece of work, which is interviewing a cross-section of people at the business, because I don't believe anything I'm told by the owners.
We're all full of shit.
Some, to varying degrees. It's subjective. It's their baby, right? It's subjective. But the people working on the factory floor or the staff or whatever, cross-section, I look at the financials in depth. I look at all their marketing stuff, website. I look at everything. And depending on the budget, I'll go deep into the business and also look at the processes and all the rest of it. And then I produce a report and recommendations. And then from there, the client will then say, this is what we agree. We co-create what's needed. Now, I don't use any of the language of coaching, consulting, advice, facilitation, mediation. Those are techniques. I know we've got to start somewhere, so I position myself as a business coach, but honestly, all I'm doing really is I'm supporting the business in whatever it needs to become its true potential.
Yeah.
Some businesses need more telling, some businesses need more listening to the people. So it involves one-on-one coaching with each of the board members, including the CEO, where I have to have Chinese walls, internal Chinese walls, to keep privacy between each of those people, then and the staff, and then groups of staff together, depending what they need. And then it goes on. I'd say an average piece of work is 18 months, but the record is 12 years and still going.
Wow.
And then the shortest I've done is half a day. So it can be anything in between. I've started in the last couple of years. I tried something from my hospital bed. I wanted to do work with a much higher volume of people. So I did my first training course, which meant getting bums on seats by certain dates, called The Business of Business. And I did a few lots of cohorts, which went very, very well. I got really good feedback. But the whole thing of having what I've now discovered, you have to have a funnel, you have to do a certain number of emails, and then a deadline with a number of bums on seats by a certain time isn't me. I'm not going to do that anymore. Really, I'm going to transfer that content of the modules that I designed will go into content that you can buy passively on my website over the next year or two. And then I'll get to bigger groups and more people by being brave enough with my quiet shouting and introversion to put my hand up for doing talks and working with bigger groups and asking, can I come up and stand on the stage with 100 people or 200 people? But my dream isn't to do a talk. The dream, which I've done a few times and I've discovered I can do, is the opposite. I'd like to stand on stage with nothing prepared, with 50 or 100 business owners. I've done it with 30 or 40 and it works. And then just shut up and say, okay, over to you. Roving microphone, tell me your challenge. And my radio, and do it one day. I'd love to do a radio show like Frasier. Tell me your challenge. And I've got no preparation. And what I've discovered is I'm in my 60s now. You can imagine with all that years that I haven't yet come across any question or challenge that anybody's brought up that I can't add some value within 5 minutes. And then the next person. And the image I've got in my mind, Alex, is I feel like I'm the driver, whatever it's called, probably not a driver, conductor, whatever, a driver of the front of a train. And it's an open train, old fashioned, it's got coal in it. And then going behind me for miles are, what do they call those? The things that get pulled. It's a cargo.
Yes, I know what you mean. The carriages, but they're not carriages either.
Wagons. There are wagons going miles behind me, and each of the wagons has got lots of nuggets in them. And I don't even know what they are. I can't even remember them myself. I couldn't tell you what they are. But what I discovered, this ridiculous thing that I discovered by accident, was that I get asked a question, or I've got this challenge, says the business owner, and then from somewhere, I channel some freaking nugget that's lost back in from 40 years ago that I didn't even know I had. And then out it comes. I think, God, where the hell did that come from? But it's something useful for them. So actually, I don't want to so much go up and do a speech. Oh, wow, that was a wonderful. Honestly, I don't really enjoy doing that. And I have to do these things to get better known. And I will do them. The best heaven to me would be those type of gigs. And I've been beginning to do them over the last couple of years with groups of people. The British Library let me experiment on their amazing British Library Business Centre and IP Centre have got thousands of business owners who use it for their resources. And they let me try what I've just been talking about on them. And it went really well. So that's what I'd love to do more of.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, the core business, I have no problem. I have plenty of business through recommendation, and this thing called a website. I've just discovered the internet's taking off, and it's time to get on board if you're not already. The bloody thing works. I'm telling you, I had no faith. I thought, oh God, I've got to have a website. It'll be useful like a business card before and after I've met people.
Yeah.
And now I discovered, with a few £100 a month on Google AdWords ads, a bit of SEO, that strangers are coming to my website going, wow, we really love what you stand for. Contact me and become really great clients. And I'm going, bloody hell, I'm shocked. This is amazing. So this is a all new, amazing energy with each 6 months, each year, each month. I'm always learning, always trying something new, and afraid of it. But fuck it, do it anyway. Fear is a doorway.
Yeah, because it's so much fun once we show up anyway and go, oh, it's really scary, but here we go. Yeah, it's brilliant. And it's really interesting that you say about the talking and the non-preparation. It's funny, isn't it? Because although we're not, I speak in that way. The first thing I do when I go on stage is I say, guys, this is a conversation. If you're looking for someone to talk at you for 2 years, the door's over there. It's not going to happen. I want some interaction. And I did a half a day's course, I think it was, years ago, with a brilliant guy called George Sava, a South African guy, and it was about public speaking. And I was already fairly extroverted. I'll just get up and, I'm pretty cool at doing that. I almost like doing that more than not. So I was kind of already there, but the thing that he said to me was about, if you know your subject, you don't need to prepare. And that really, because I had this whole thing, like, I have to prepare. I used to go to BNI, the networking event. You have to do 60 seconds. And I never used to prepare. I used to hate writing stuff down. It would go really badly for me if I over-prepared. If I had like 3 headlines of things that I had to get across, I'd fill the gaps, good at timing, off it would go. And it's interesting that the not preparing, but actually you spent 40 years preparing for any talk that you ever do. Like you say, you've got these wagons of nuggets behind you and we don't even realize that it's there. And someone asks the question and poof, we're off. And it's just, I think the best speakers are the ones that do that. The most interesting talks I've been to are the unscripted. There's a theme and we know we need to get this point across, but how it comes across at the time changes. So what I was thinking about when you were saying that, I was like, oh, I wonder if there's a company called Funzing. They're mainly in London, but they now do talks all over. I don't know if you've heard of them.
No.
They're a brilliant platform for speakers. So I did some speaking there. One of my old coaches, Judy May Murphy, I worked with a few years ago. She'd spoken. She recommended them to me. And you have a topic. And I love your idea. It's almost like business clinic. Bring me anything. Like show up, tell me what your symptoms are, and we'll talk. I wonder if there's a thing there that can be done. They basically sell the tickets. They have a brilliant platform of people who are looking for interesting things to go to. They sell the tickets. You split the ticket price, but more important. I mean, it's negligible in the big scheme of the figures we're talking about here. It's like it's 10 quid a ticket or whatever. It's nothing. But I wonder if there are some platforms like that to play with, especially because you're in that part of the world.
I don't know. I'd love to find them. That sounds really interesting. The sort of practice sessions over the last few years, I have got a brand for it. It's just it's pretty pathetic. There must be something better. It's just called Ask Alan. That's it.
I love that. It's brilliant. I love you. It does what it says on the tin.
Well, yeah, I'd love to do that, whatever those are, and I keep my eye out for opportunities to do that if I can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then I guess it's finding the places. My mind is going, oh, where can Alan go? I want to show up as well. It sounds like so much fun. Really, really fun. And what would you say? I want to go back to money and finances and, that part of business that I think is, I agree, it's so important. I love that your dad, all those years back, he was like, what? And it's so common. I think the more I do business and property, I mean, property is all about the numbers to a certain extent. And there's a whole, I love the heart, head balance. And what I like to say is I follow my heart, but I check it with the numbers in my head. And then if the two stack, often I predict that it will stack, but I always do the double check. Like, I will do the numbers. And it was my dad that taught me that. He was like, just all going on emotion. You need to do the figures. And I'd be like, oh, okay. Here's the figures. Look, see, I'm right. And that. And I really got, because then sometimes I wasn't right. The odd time that I wasn't right, I was like, oh, I need to pay attention to this. What do you say to businesses starting at, like, where's the best place for them to learn? And I love that you have the video in the leaders group. I'd got about halfway through when you messaged me about that. I was like, yes, I'm already reading. I'm already watching it.
Amazing.
So brilliant. How did you learn? So when your dad said that to you about balance sheet, and I mean, accounting's come such a long way to the point where we've got, zero and all of these things that make it even easier. But what did you do to learn that back then? When you were you're in a business and you're going, God, my cash flow isn't working. What do you think are the most important things how do people understand it in a simple way when they're starting out? It's almost like
I had a really good another really big learning from my father. Accounts is not the same as management information. And it isn't about understanding accounts. It's not about zero or anything the bookkeeper or accountant wants to tell us. It's nothing to do with that.
Okay.
I make a big distinction, because if you think of the mindset of an accountant, they do an amazing job, fantastic. And why are they doing what they're doing? It's 99.99, if not 100%, to do with compliance with the law, and accuracy to the penny of recording history. Whereas we are driving a car down a freaking motorway, and I want to know what's ahead. Of course, I need to know a bit about where I've been, but what speed am I going? What's the direction? How is the engine okay? Is there enough petrol? Is the engine over revving? Those are not anything to do with what accountants or bookkeepers get up in the morning to do. So the question then becomes, what type of business am I running? What do I need to know in my language for me as an owner of a business? It does derive from what's under the bonnet, from what is there that the accountants or bookkeepers can have access to. They have access to the history. But the rest is what I need to see. Is there a speedometer, a rev counter, a fuel gauge? Can I see out of the windows of the car? Can I see what's coming ahead of me? Okay, it's useful to know what's behind me, but mainly it's about ahead. So it doesn't matter what the size of the business is. It's about having a dashboard that you understand. And the difficulty, the challenge, the hardest bit is believing enough in what you want. And in a way, I'm going to say fighting, but I mean in a positive way. Maybe there's a better word than that. Standing for, communicating with whoever is around us that has access to that financial information, and if not, get somebody in order to give us what we need to run our business.
And how do you, it's so interesting putting it that way. And I really get it. Like, accounting is so historical in the sense of even the deadlines for tax submission, is the January after the March after the year ended. It's so historical.
Yep.
How do you do that? Because I'm really aware of that. I do that with my clients with their property business, that we have a projection of these are the deals we think we'll do. This is what we think it's going to cost.
Mm.
You know, these are the rents that are already coming
Great.
in, all of that. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes,
So you're just
yes.
talking about actually sitting down.
That's
and
forecasting, what you've just described. You're forecasting and you're checking, will that house, will that property in this example, whether it's multi-occupancy, single occupancy, whether it's people who want to rent and they're interested in income, or others are interested in capital growth, and then flipping, you know, again, all those things go together. So in order to work that out, we're going to do a forecast. Now, it is important that somebody who has accounting, bookkeeping knowledge, that has enough understanding, but it doesn't have to be you. It can be somebody in your team who understands that stuff, that will check all that as well. Because the thing that is technically difficult to do is a cash flow. That's hard to do. And I don't propose for a moment anybody should learn that. Forget it. And, you know, I look at teams, whether they're football teams or rugby or sports teams or rowing or any other kind of team. A band is another great metaphor. Everyone's doing that, you know, in the main, 2 arms, 2 legs, human being, male, female. And then what are the differences? This person is really good at scoring goals. This person's very good at defending. This person's really good at selling. They're natural salespeople, amazing. People just believe them, they trust them, but they're not really detail person. But this person over here loves all the detail. And you go on and on again, whether it's thousands of people or starting out. But the roles are very important to work out. And it doesn't need a financial genius to be one of those roles, but it does need somebody to have with you who you tap into from time to time. And once you've explained to them what you're trying to do, flip a property, rent it, or combinations thereof, and then you're describing the amount of cash you've got, how much you're borrowing, they then can help you get that together. So you've got a spectrum here of knowledge that will then give you what you need to make those big decisions.
Fascinating. It's really interesting when you're saying that. There's a level to, you know, we're doing that obviously we're doing that in our property businesses. And it's an interesting one in the realms of accountants as people, you know, who do accounting and this might be, I've not spoken to enough of them, but there's a level to which getting them to do the forward, it takes something to get them to switch from recording to cash flowing. So there's almost, for me, there's like, there's a bit like when you were doing sound and you said, I need to deal with what the guys on the stage are hearing, not what the you know, the punters are hearing. It's kind of like that. It's an interesting one for the accounting profession to take on, actually, of this is a huge thing that businesses need that is least accessible. You know, it's not just given. I mean, one of my clients, Sabrina, she's been on this podcast. She's a power lifter and a PT by trade, personal trainer, and she's going into bookkeeping and accounting after being in a JV and being clearly the detailed person who loves the spreadsheets, who's doing all that. And she's starting to do that for people, but it's not a natural offering in the business world that I know.
I'm not saying that's what I meant about fighting for it. So the way around that, one of the tools or the languaging that I give to early stage businesses that I work with is there is no right answer. And you see, accountants are programmed, they wake up every morning with they have to be accurate and right. And therefore, I recommend to everybody when they give information to their bookkeeper or accountant to then translate into something, if they can't do it themselves, spreadsheet or whatever, I go, please do optimistic, realistic, and pessimistic. Because the accountants will then not fight back. It's less of an obstacle. They'll say, okay, so you want 3 versions of this because oh yes, of course, we can't predict the future. There is no right or wrong. and that removes that dynamic.
Yes.
Oh my God, I have to do something that's
Just
right.
let my dog out. She's excited because my little one has come home with the nanny. Oh, I love working from home. Yes, that is brilliant. So then, without them even realizing it, you're getting them to get off that right and wrong, black and white, it is this way, because you've given them that, like that, pessimistic, realistic and optimistic.
Yeah, but I do tell them it's to get off that.
Yeah.
And that there is no right and wrong. And then the light bulb usually goes on, and then the pressure goes down. And I think pretty much all of the early stage businesses that I've helped one way or the other have gone on to use that, and also get off. Again, it's a societal thing of having to be right and wrong and good and bad and all that's just not there. Take it away, and then it'll flow.
Yeah. It's one of the most freeing things I learned, getting rid of bad and wrong and right and wrong and all of that world. It's incredibly freeing. Alan, we have spoken for nearly 2 hours, and I could carry on, which means we probably need to do this again sometime. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear your story. Actually, there's so much. I just love hearing people's stories and the nuggets of the gold that is within the stories, and listening to your learning and what you've done and where you've come from and what you've dealt with and all of that world. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak. I'm starting to think, because I get so close to the 2-hour wire, I've got one other, Kevin Birch, who's a parenting coach. We've kind of just gone, do you know what? We need to go for 3 hours. And we hit about 2 hours, 45 minutes. So maybe Joe Rogan really is on something. I said to you before we came live, I was like, it's just kind of Joe Rogan style. We talk and we see where it goes. And then maybe there's something magic in his 3-hour thing, because he kind of wraps up just for 3 hours. And I'm really aware that I've got so many more questions left to ask you and talk about and all of that world. So I would love to do this again sometime in what I will call my next season from September onwards, and foray further into business. And I think there's an idea germinating in my mind as well about, I love your idea of in my head it's already called business clinic. That, like, having a group of people and just having those conversations. So that sounds really fun. I'm sure there's something there to do in that whole world. What would be your final thought for this conversation, for people listening to this who are in any area of business, they're in their own business? What would be your final thought for them?
Well, I have adapted Steve Jobs's mantra of stay hungry, stay foolish. And my final word is stay hungry, stay learning.
Brilliant. I love it. And that applies to every single person listening to this. That never ends, right? Until we die, I guess. And then it'll tell you, well, you're going to come back reincarnated as someone else. So it starts all over again. I love that. So stay hungry, stay learning. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. We will put the links in at all the platforms that this appears at. Your website is alanwick.com.
It is. Brilliant. Yes, it's worth looking at now. I'm proud of it.
It's so funny, that journey with the websites. I so resonate with that. Mine's the same. So people can find you on Alan Wick. What's the best way to reach out to you if people want to? Is it via your website? Have you got a contact thing that people can just go, this is who I am, I think you might be able to help me, I love the way you speak? And
yes, it is. Yeah, there's the email is lovebusiness@alanwick.com.
Brilliant. That's amazing. Thanks so much, Alan.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening, everyone. It's been epic.
Thank you very much for having me, Alex.
You're welcome.